Welcome back to the shop. Today's project is going to be picture frames. I got a request from my daughter for 3 picture frames for my grandson. She has 3 pictures of him from when he was a newborn that are 16 by 20, and she wants to hang them in her living room. She lives on the Cape, so we want something that is kind of beach life-ish, and also they're really big frames, so we want to find a light wood that's supportive of the pictures and also fits into the style of Cape Cod beach life. We're looking through the shop and what we had in the scrap pile. I found some 5/4 cedar that I'll be able to cut down and make 3 picture frames that are 24 by 28 with 2-inch rails and stiles. Because of the size and how cedar is very light wood, we're going to put wedges in the corners just to support it. And we're going to rough cut. We'll throw it through the joiner and the planer, through the router to get some edges on it, and glue it all up. I'm not a SketchUp guy, although I'm somewhat technical. I prefer it in the shop to keep things very basic. So I actually maintain notebooks with all my projects. And in my notebooks, I actually do all my design work and come up with what is the process and dimensions and everything that I'm going to need for a project. I like to do that because then I have something as a memorial to look back and look and see when did I work on it, what did I use to do it, and if I'm duplicating a project, it works to my advantage. So the next few videos that we'll kind of string together, we'll have the process that I go through, so stay with us. During the rough cut process, what I've done is I've taken the 5/4 cedar and I've trimmed it down so that I wind up with 2 boards that are still the 8 foot long, but I've taken off the radius edge, so now I'm down about 4 3/4. What I'm going to do now is actually rough cut these to length. I've already done one set, so I'm going to do the sets at 24 inch and a 28 inch. Once I have them down to that rough side, then I'll throw them through the planer. I'll show you the quick process that I go through. Most folks who are working in a shop know this stuff already, but I'm going to start with the edge of this board, kind of make it flush, and then cut it off in 28 inch increments. So take a look, and always don't forget to wear these. Now with a clean edge, what I'll do is I will measure off 28 inches for a set of the stiles. Take my marks, and I'll go through and I'll cut these off. So we'll show you the next step in just a minute. In the last series I went through and I cut the boards to length, and one of the things you heard me say was cut it down to 28 inches. I wasn't paying attention. I was focused on the video and not the cut. What I wanted to do with all of my cuts is make the boards 29 inches or 25 inches, so I had waste on either side. Unfortunately, one board is actually cut 27 and 15/16. So I'll still go to work with it. I just got to be very careful as I work through it, and to make sure that I don't lose it, I put a nice little sad face on it with some chalk. So what I did in the process was I went through on the joiner, got a nice square edge on this. What I'm going to do now is bring them over to the table saw, cut them down to my 2-inch width. This is going to be a finish cut. Excuse me. And then I'm going to put them back through the joiner to make sure that I have a nice flat face, and then we'll put them through the planer. So more to come. Stay tuned. Okay, I've got all my pieces cut to length now. To width. So we're 2 inches wide by either the rough cut of 25 or the rough cut of 29. We're going to run them through the planer, the joiner at this point, just get a nice flat face to it. These are 1.25 inches, and what I want to do is run them through because there's a little bit of a cup in some of them. So what I want to do is run them through, make sure they're flat, even, and then I'll run through the planer to get the other side. My guess is when I'm at 5.25 now, I'll probably wind up down to 1 1/8 or maybe 1 3/16 inches. Remember what I said earlier, I had made a mistake when I cut one of the boards right at 28 inches. So what I'm doing is I'm making sure this match set stays together because these are going to be 2 of my stiles or rails as I go across. So I got to be super careful with these and make sure they stay together because they're the ones that are off a little bit. So keeping my marks on it. Before you run through the joiner, one of the things you got to make sure of is you feel the grain on the board. Where it's the smoothest, that's the direction you want to go in when you run it through the joiner and the planer. If not, you're going to wind up with chip out. And chip out, and that's kind of the reason why we got a little bit extra on the width, the lengths right now, in order to avoid that chip out. And if we have any, we take care of it. But with these that I made the mistake on, I got to be super careful. And just you'll feel the grain. If you go one way, you'll feel it smooth. The other way, it's rough. So what I do is I feel it, figure out which is the grain direction, which is really the growth of the tree, and then I mark it. I mark the board, and then when I run it through the joiner, I make sure that I keep that face and that direction going, and then later on we'll run it through the planer itself. The other piece I want to point out is, and this is a problem that I found early in my woodworking, is that I always try to find the perfect board, and guess what? None of them exist. So what you want to make sure of is when you're making your cuts, that you're trying to cut around the imperfections in the board. So what you'll notice is on this particular board, there's a knot, and that knot has a crack in it. So what I did when I made my cuts is I made sure that that was going to be in the middle and not in the middle of the saw cut, because that knot will pop out. Remember, we want something rustic, so the knots actually work to our advantage, but we're just going to cut around them and be very aware of them. If something is very loose during the finishing process, what we can actually do is drop some glue in there. So we'll see if that's going to be necessary. We'll be sure to show that piece if we do. But more to come. I'm going to bring these over to the joiner now and get me a nice flat face. Okay, so what we've done so far is we have jointed the edges. We have face planed one side. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use the power planer, run it through the planer itself, and it'll bring it down to a measurement probably just under an inch. I actually found when I was going through it, there's a bit of a cup in the board, so I actually took off probably close to an eighth of an inch by running it through the joiner. I'll run one pass through just so you can kind of hear the noise and see the process, but otherwise it's really noisy, so I'll just kind of do one or two so you can see it. The noise in the background you're going to hear is the dust collector. You see a hose over here that actually sucks up all the dust. The planer and the joiner produce tremendous amounts of dust, so if you don't have a dust collector in your shop, figure something out, either with a shop vac and a cyclone or something, just to keep the dust down, for not only for your health, but then also for cleanup. So we'll do one real quick so you can see it, and then I'll go through and do the rest. So now we've got the boards all cut, jointed, planed, ready to actually start the miters. What I want to point out is one of the things that I found. So when I was working on this board, I don't know if you can actually see the cup in that. That's why you have to plane them and joint them, because otherwise if you're trying to make a miter corner, you will never get a good corner if your boards are not flat and square. So throw the calipers on this. This actually measures a solid 1 inch. After going through and doing the joiner and the planer, it now is just a little bit shy, a 32nd of an inch shy of a full eighth of an inch. So one of the things that you want to do as you're going through and checking, if I can find a tool here, is your objective is that you're square and flat across the board. And what you want to use is your trusty combination square. A little bit of history here. This was my dad's. So I couldn't even tell you how many pieces of furniture this has made, and it's one of my trusted tools in the shop that you never let anybody touch it except me. So but when you're done, you want to take your square. You want to make sure that when you come across that board, that there's absolutely no daylight across the whole thing, so that you are perfectly square. That's your objective, because if you don't do that, when you go to do a 45 degree to get that 90-degree angle, it just won't happen. All right, so I'm going to set up the table saw now. Actually use my miter sled in order to make those cuts. And I'm also going, actually before I do that, I'm going to cut out the rabbets for the matting and the back. So let's jump to that, and then we'll jump to the miter sled. I'll show you how that process works in just a minute. So let's talk about table saw setup for the rabbet on the back of the picture frames. First, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use dado blades in order to do it, and I'm going to use a sacrificial fence. So let me just show you how that's set up. I'm going to flip the camera around so you can actually see the table saw set up as well. So bear with me as I adjust here. And what I've done is on the table saw itself, I've got a dado blade set, and I've buried that into a sacrificial fence. One of the things that I do with my dado blades is I actually have a sheet that identifies what all my settings need to be, so that way I don't have to keep remembering. So what I've done is I've buried that in the fence, and I ran a test cut through the table saw. So as it comes through, as you can see, it's coming through, it cuts, goes through, and then that way I have a test cut in the end, so I can see that I'm actually going to be a ½ an inch deep into the table, into the frame itself, with a ¼ inch lip. What I'll do later on is run a rabbit plane through that, just to clean it up a little bit. So always use the sacrificial fence, that way you won't risk damaging your primary fence. And you don't have to worry about the technical setup for your dado blades. That way you can get as close as you want, then bury it in the fence in order to determine what your right length depth is going to be. Always use test pieces. You've got plenty of scrap around the shop. Believe me, I've made plenty of mistakes. That means I have plenty of scraps. So that's how you set up. I'm going to run them through, and I'll show you when I'm done. Grain direction, chips, knots, etc. That's what's important when you're getting ready to go through and put the rabbit through. What I like to do is I inspect the board and say, you know what, I want to stay away from that spot. I want to cut on this edge. And then I line them up to the right of my blade, so then that way it's a production. I bring it over, cut it, I don't have to worry about doing the check. So in this particular case, you'll notice there's a chip right there, and that will not go well going through the table saw for the rabbit. So if I did go through that, that whole board would explode, and it would be of no value to me. So I'm actually going to use it as an edge for actually some beauty to it once I get the stain on it. So what I'm going to do is make sure is when I go through the blade, I go through this way. Let me run one through, I'll show you how I do it. There are many out there that use the safety covers. I don't have one for my saw. I actually prefer not to use one. That's my personal preference. It's, again, many folks may give me grief about it, but I'm extremely safe. I use push sticks. So I'll show you one cut, and then I'll move on and do the rest of them off camera. By using the push sticks, you notice my fingers were always 3 or 4 inches away from the blade. The other thing that I do in my mind is I always count to 10 before I actually turn the saw on. So you may have saw a slight pause there. And somebody taught me this, I forget who it was, but the intent is you count to 10. If you started with 10, you want to end with 10. So let me finish up these cuts, we'll be right back. Okay, rabbits are cut, and now it comes time for the miter. I learned a couple of things. I actually did one setup of the miter. But I learned cedar is a soft wood, so much like when you cut plywood, that if you don't account for it, you may get chip out. And I did have that happen. But you'll see in this piece, when I cut it, you actually see the chip out. So I learned, and what I did on future cuts is I put masking tape across the board, across my pencil line. So when I actually made my cut, it was perfectly clean. So I'm going to next show you the actual miter sled setup. So you can see how I set it up. I encourage you to make one. It makes it a lot easier when you're going to be making picture frames.